Today's episode has been brought to you by Schedulicity.
And also by the Mama Nurture Prenatal Yoga School. Learn to teach fertility yoga, prenatal, postnatal, and baby and me yoga with confidence. To find out about our online or in-person trainings, visit mamanurture.ca. And don't forget, we spell mama M-A-M-A, so that's mamanurture.ca. Welcome to episode 141 of the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Crow. I'm a mom of three, a yoga teacher, and a trainer and consultant who works for yoga teachers. And this podcast was created for you because I get it, Connected Yoga Teachers. It's not always easy to be a small business owner or an entrepreneur. Part of being an entrepreneur and business owner is dealing with our money mindset. It is an essential part of our business, and whether you love it or you hate it, you need to embrace it and cultivate a relationship with money. We've talked about money and profit on the podcast before. Recently, in episode 130, we talked with Emily Sussel, and she shared how she makes a profit teaching private yoga. And I did a money mindset mini-series in episode 41 to 44, where we covered making profit, talking about our money stories, generating a minimum viable income, and tips on accounting. These are all linked in the show notes if you want to go back and have a listen. The main thing I'd love to say right now is that our work around money never really ends. So today, I've invited Katie Brauer onto the podcast to share some insights on this topic. We talk about how to open up the money conversation, how a money buddy can be helpful to your relationship with money, and what it means to be in relationship with our money. We also dive into something we all struggle with, raising your rates, and doing it even when it feels scary. This is such an important topic for all of us to think about. If you have ever hesitated to raise your rates or felt uncomfortable with your relationship with money, this episode is a great way to help to start to change that. All of our show notes are ready for you at theconnectedyogateacher.com/141, and there you can find all of the links that we talk about, along with clickable timestamps so you can easily go back to a specific topic in each episode. Before we dive in and meet Katie, I want to say a huge shout out to Nicola. Nicola sent me a note that said, "Thank you so much for creating this community. I've been listening to your podcast for 2 days nonstop, and I'm feeling so empowered. I'm a new yoga teacher with a full-time corporate job, and I'm feeling super inadequate in making the leap out of my career into yoga. Your podcasts are helping me realize the potential I have and how my experience in other areas can support my yoga business when I get there. I completed an amazing YTT that gave me a sprinkling of so much out in the yoga world that it's actually been overwhelming to determine how to move forward. But your niching down concept has been super thought-provoking and grounding. You are amazing. I can't wait to get into more of your content. Very happy and thankful, Nicola." Nicola, I cannot tell you how much this warms my heart, and these are the kind of notes that keep me going on the days when I'm struggling to figure out the tech or do my accounting or all of the things that are challenging as a podcaster and as a small business owner myself. So thank you so much for taking the time to leave this review. It means a lot. I also just want to say that in the past few weeks, I've talked to a few people, a few yoga teachers who feel like they're the only one struggling. And I want you to know, Connected Yoga Teachers, and Nicola said it so well in this note, that we are all struggling. We're all feeling imposter syndrome at times. We're all doubting, is this what I'm supposed to be doing? We're all making mistakes. And so this podcast is just really here for you to sort through some things, learn some things, be inspired, hear stories of how people have struggled and how they keep going. That's really what it's like to be an entrepreneur. So if you haven't left a review yet, you can do that by going to the show notes. So go to theconnectedyogateacher.com/141, and I try and read each and every review here on the podcast. Now let's hear our hot tip of the week from the team over at Schedulicity.
Hello, connected yoga teachers. This is Michaela with the Schedulicity Hot Tip of the Week. Schedulicity is an amazing accounting tool. Your dashboard shows your weekly estimated revenue, the number of bookings you have, and the average revenue per booking. Enabling the payment add-on makes things even easier. Once you're connected to Stripe or Square, all your transactions will be listed on your payment screen, and you can select a date range, search by tender type or confirmation number, and export that information to an Excel document. With your schedule and your money this organized, you might have time to tackle something even tougher, like that weird junk drawer or your kid's closet.
Thank you so much, Team Schedulicity. I am excited to announce that Jane from Schedulicity, who was the very first person I talked to there, is actually taking a yoga teacher training. So congratulations, Jane, if you're listening, and we are all rooting for you. Okay, connected yoga teachers, let's dive in and meet Katie. Katie Brauer is an international yoga educator. She's a high-performance coach, and she's a mentor, really working at the intersection of yoga and entrepreneurship. So you can tell why we get along so well. Katie has been described as a powerhouse yogi and rising leader by Forbes. She is the creator of the Yoga Professional Incubator, which is an online business and personal growth incubator for yoga teachers. As you're about to hear, Katie is an Australian native. She's also a former professional snowboarder. Today, Katie helps people transform their businesses, their relationships, and their lives through coaching, group programs, and retreats. Let's dive in and meet Katie. Welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher Podcast, Katie. It's great to have you here today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited.
Me too. I'm excited that we get to dig into talking about money as yoga teachers. And before we do that, tell me, where did your yoga journey begin? Do you remember your first yoga class or your first yoga experience?
I do remember my first yoga class because it was pretty awful. I felt really unsupported. It felt very esoteric and woo-woo. There was no context for anything that was happening. And I was just like, this is weird. And it feels really uncomfortable in my body. And so I actually didn't go back for quite a while.
I love that you share that, because a lot of people are like, I just knew in that moment that I wanted to be a yoga teacher. And sometimes it's really weird or it's just not a good fit. So then what made you then become a yoga teacher? Like, where was that shift? When did that happen?
I did go back, and I ended up meeting and experiencing a teacher that had a totally different, what I would call like a more modern approach to yoga. And it was really about how I felt in her presence rather than what she did in terms of like the design of the class. And it was just, I felt seen, I felt heard, I felt supported, I felt comfortable to ask questions. I really just felt good. And so it was more about like, that felt good, I want to do that again. And then that was sort of what got me going back. And, I really appreciate my first yoga experience, because that is what has influenced my teaching and the way in which I design all of my curriculum and really approach teaching myself and teaching teachers how to teach, because it was such an awful experience. I felt so terrible that I would never, ever want anyone I would never want anyone to feel the way that I did, because now kind of being on the other side and 20 plus years into my yoga journey, I look back and I'm like, oh my gosh, I could have totally missed the bus completely. I could have maybe never have gone back and really just boiled it down to that one awful experience. And that would be a bummer. So, when new students come to my classes, I'm always just like, yes, I get to be the first touch point. And I really want to do my best to make it a memorable and favorable and lovely experience for them so that they do come back.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
So then fast forward to now in our conversation today, where did you start to dig in and be comfortable about talking about money as a yoga teacher and someone who works with yoga teachers and trains yoga teachers?
I think I was born comfortable talking about money. This is it really, I think, partially is a cultural thing, but also my first job when I was 11 was washing dishes at this friend of my mom's restaurant. And it was a very busy restaurant and a very nice restaurant. And when I did my interview with her and the topic of money came up, she said, well, what do you think that you should earn? And as an 11-year-old, I said, well, I think I should earn what anyone would earn that's doing this job. I don't think that my age should be a consideration because I'm doing the job. And she ended up, this is in Australia, she paid me $17 an hour, time and a half on Saturdays and double time on Sundays.
Wow.
And that was my first experience earning money in, like, quote unquote, a real job. And that really, when I look back kind of over my lifetime and my relationship to money and my worth and asking for money and being in that conversation with money, that really had such a profound impact on me and gave me a sense of confidence. Because after that job, I did a few things. I started a window washing business. So my entrepreneurial escapades started really early in my life. I think I was maybe 15 at the time. And then I had shifted high schools and got a job at this coffee shop in Sydney, and they wanted to pay me $12 an hour. And I was like, I just kind of, I think now looking back, arrogantly laughed because I was like, well, I was earning $17 as an 11-year-old. And so, in a lot of ways, I think that really influenced and profoundly impacted me in that relationship to money and talking about money. And it's just sort of been from there.
And so what do you see as some of the hurdles that yoga teachers have around money? I hear a lot of, how much should I charge? How can I charge that? Like, will people pay for that? How can I make money as a yoga teacher?
Mm-hmm. I think the first thing is a willingness to talk about it, because it's just so uncomfortable for the majority of people on the planet, not just yoga teachers. And that's what I'm really inspired to do and motivated to do, is just open up this conversation around money. There's so much shame. There's so much shame that goes along with money, and it doesn't have to be. It's just like, if there's a willingness to just own wherever you're at and take out the labeling of good or bad or comparison to, this person or that person or where you thought you would be at this moment in your life, that's the beginning. It's kind of like just get naked with your money. You know what I mean? And you don't need to go blurting it out on social media unless you feel inspired to do that. But if you just have one buddy that you're like, you know what, I'm really wanting to empower myself around money, and would you be willing to be my money buddy? And I want to, like, just kind of share everything. This is where I'm at. This is what I've done. These are the mistakes I've made. This is where I want to go. And have that one person that you can be in conversation with and really accountability with. It will change your life. And for sure, it'll empower your relationship and shift your relationship with money. But it starts with conversation.
Oh, I like this. So this money buddy that we find, is that someone who is like, would we pick a partner or a best friend, or would we look outside of that?
Either. I mean, you could really just start having conversations with people around, something that's front and center for me right now is money, and this desire to learn more about my patterns with money, why I have the relationship that I do with money, where that came from, how that's playing out, what it's costing me. And is that something that would be interesting to you? And if it is, then like there's your person.
Right.
And then it really comes down to sort of scheduling and having structures in place of like, okay, where do you start? So I actually have something for your listeners, this 3-day wealth accelerator for yoga teachers that takes them through a look at money. So there's like a whole action book. They could do this with a partner, which I highly recommend actually, but it really looks at belief systems around money, and then what has kind of what I call like influenced your blueprint of money. So who was your inner circle as a child, and what were their beliefs around money? And then who was on the outer circle of that, and what were their beliefs around money? Because oftentimes there's a big distinction between inner and outer. So there could have been someone in your outer circle that actually had more influence over you than your primary caregivers and their beliefs. So even just breaking that down is really fascinating of like, oh, interesting. And then on the flip side of that is like current day, okay, who's in your inner circle now that's influencing you? And then who's on your outer circle? And when you look at that and you just gather the data with no positive, negative, good or bad, and you just look at it, then you get to see like kind of the lay of the land, and also ask yourself the question, okay, is that actually working for me? Because what I see with yoga teachers oftentimes is one person is like, oh, you can't make money making yoga. And then it's like everybody jumps on the bandwagon, and that's the conversation that's happening.
Right.
And it's quite honestly, that's total bullshit. That has not been my experience at all. And I know plenty of people in the yoga space that has not been their experience. And if that's the conversation that's happening and you're not wanting to be a broke yoga teacher, then the first piece is like getting into a different conversation with different people. And they do exist. And so, yeah, so it starts with the beliefs, and then it really comes down to structures and systems and sort of the way in which you're in relationship to your money, because it's like any relationship. You need to tend to it, nurture it, know what's going on, listen to it, ask it for things, and really be in relationship. So there's resources and stuff that I have for that, to be able to do that. And then there's also, rituals and best practices that I've done and experienced over the years and put into practice at different points in time that have been like really critical and valuable for me in my life and for others that have implemented them. So
what do you think are some of those where you thought, okay, I tried this thing and now it has made a huge shift in my relationship with money? By the way, I really like how you said we're in relationship with our money and that we need to nurture it and listen to it.
Yeah, it's like and actually a friend of mine, Nicole Lombardo, she has a company called the Money Flow Co. And she taught me to write letters to money, and also for money to write letters to me. So in that is like, so I'll sit down and do a meditation or, go for a walk through this canyon that I live on and just get quiet and then come back, or take my journal down there and be like, just start stream of consciousness, writing a letter. And it is quite incredible what comes through. And that has for sure strengthened my relationship and deepened my listening, because oftentimes money is knocking on the door in ways that we're not even privy to. So for instance, a couple of weeks ago, one of the things that I do at the end of every day is sort of a quick inventory of like, how has money shown up for me today beyond just a dollar exchange? And a couple of weeks ago, it was like every single day was someone dropped off a care package for me. And then I got this beautiful jewelry in the mail from Asha Patel. And then a friend of mine took me out for lunch. And then like it was every single day, it got to the end of the week and I was like, wow, I am so rich right now through like money is flowing to me in different ways, because had I been expending on these, there would have been money going out. But that's also, it's sort of like shifting the perspective and then being able to be in a place of awe in how money flows in indirect ways and direct ways. And that's something like one of Deepak Chopra's books that I read a long, long time ago, Spontaneous Fulfillment of Desire. He has this exercise in there that at the end of the day, it's really looking back on the day and looking at, where were the synchronicities and where were these threads? And that's kind of where this practice came from. It's something I've been doing for a long time. Just a few minutes at the end of the day of just like, okay, is there anything that happened that was actually magic that I didn't even realize was magic in the moment? And there always is. And that's what really excites me, is like this magic of really being alive and being in relationship with everything around us.
So a few things that I hear you saying about this. So is this a practice where you sit and you contemplate and you think about it, or do you actually write it down and journal it? Like, how do you do that check-in at the end of the day?
Combination. So sometimes it's just thinking about it, and sometimes it's journaling. So again, my friend Nicole, she has a journal for money, and in her journal, when I do it, there's like a list of like a daily check-in where you would write down. So again, and I think that that's actually really helpful to put pen to paper, because oftentimes when there's a voice, or if you hear yourself saying like, oh my gosh, I'm so broke, or oh my gosh, like nothing ever goes my way, you can actually look back and be like, well, here's some evidence that that's not true.
Right.
And that's, I think that the critic in all of us, when it rears its head, it can really derail and hijack us. And that's why, whether it's doing stuff around money, or really even another thing for confidence, is writing down your achievements as a yoga teacher and everything that is going well, so that when the critic comes up and you notice your confidence lacking, you can go back to the truth of like, wow, okay, here's the emails that I've been sent from students saying how incredible my classes and how much they've impacted them. And here's the trainings that I've done and invested in and what I've gotten from them. And here's the goals that I've hit as a teacher, because that's the truth. And so it's really about sort of reorienting attention, essentially, in a way that's going to be life enhancing.
Right. So it sounds like we're focusing more on the abundance that's coming in, and it's not necessarily like someone is handing you dollar bills or a check or sending you a payment, that it comes in different ways.
Yeah. And I think that that is like a really great segue into, yoga teachers ask often, how much should I charge for this? Or what should I do for this workshop? Or like, how much should my add-on for the retreat be? Or someone reached out for a private group class and what should I do? And it's really a combination. So I talk a lot about kind of this Newtonian world of cause and effect, and like this very physical manifestation of like action. And it's kind of what I would call like a top-down approach. So you can look at what other people in the market are charging. So there's value in doing that, and kind of understanding the landscape. And there's also a piece of getting connected to the quantum and really getting connected to your internal world of like, okay, this is what everybody's charging, or this is sort of a baseline range. And what feels good to me? Like, what is it that, and the only way to know that is to actually get quiet and really just sit with the number. So is it 250? Is it, and just see what happens in your body, because your body, if there's a state of expansion, there's your answer. That's a yes. If you're contemplating doing, let's say, like a group private something or other, and you're thinking $250, and you're like, wow, that really sounds like a ton of money. And you close your eyes and you get quiet and you connect to your breath, and your body says, yeah, 250. Yes, that feels right. That feels expanded. That feels, or it could be 250. No, my breath is shallow and there's a knot in my stomach. And then the thoughts might be, I got to drive all that way, and there's this woman that's kind of high maintenance, and I know she's going to call me 10 times, and whatever it is. So maybe it's not that. Maybe it's 300 or 350 or 500. So I think that it's really a combination of that. For me, myself, I always go into like what also can be considered beyond the monetary exchange. So
Right.
That's of value. And there's a lot of things that I have done throughout my career where I've forgone money because I've just felt inspired to do it and contribute. And then there has been something that has come from that of like great magnitude, and that has really come from that felt sense of like, no, I just feel called to do this, and it doesn't have to be about money. And then there's other things where it's like there's that hard line of like, this is my time, and this is like my expertise, and my, I need to create and design, and that takes time. So it's this amount. So
Right.
I know it's really, I think the best thing for yoga teachers listening is to look at, okay, how do I usually do it? Do I spin out and get online and look around at what everybody else is doing and then like freeze and do nothing? Or do I kind of go the other way and just look at like, is that working, or what could I do a little bit differently to find that? But I find when I just get quiet, the answer is there.
Right. Oh, that's so helpful. It's super helpful to know. And I do feel like sometimes in my own experience as a yoga teacher and working with different yoga teachers, oftentimes we lean towards undercharging, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so do you have any tips for that?
Yeah. Do an experiment just for the sake of seeing what happens. So what you could do is you can say, okay, my regular rate is X. What's sort of the regular rate for a private in Canada?
It really depends. I've heard as low as, and please say no one's like, raise your rates if they're this low, around $45 to $50, all the way up to $200, I think is.
Okay. So let's say that, God forbid, if you're one of the teachers listening that's charging $40 to $45, this is you. I'm speaking to you right now. And everybody else is, the next time someone reaches out for a private and inquires, say, but if you're charging 45, put it up to, even if you're a brand new teacher, $85 to $100. You still have value, and it just brings the whole kind of industry up. So just for the sake of, be willing to lose the client, and just for the sake of the experiment, just say $100 and see what happens.
Right.
Because you might be actually really surprised that they say yes. And if they say no, I recommend doing it again and just seeing. Because the universe really, tests us, I think, when we kind of go out on a limb. But, one of the things with classes and packages and privates and whatnot that I did early on, and this was actually influenced by my dryland coach when I was a snowboarder, a professional snowboarder. He would only work with clients that would sign up for a year. And it was 40 sessions over the course of a year. And so when I started doing privates, I would only sign someone on if they would do 20 sessions.
Right.
And I did that for a variety of reasons. One, it meant that I didn't have to have a conversation around money.
Right.
Often. Two, and more so, two was because I knew if someone was willing to commit to 20 sessions that I could make a difference.
Right.
And and that there's a certain type of person that's willing to do 20 sessions, and they're the type of person that I want to work with, because they're the person that is going to do the homework that I give them, and I'm not just spending that 1 hour with them. They're implementing stuff that I'm giving them in other times of the day, and they're going to do the work that's necessary and be committed. And that's the type of client that I love working with, because that's just fun for me.
So I want to pull a couple of things out here and just highlight those for our listeners. One is to do this experiment of raising the rate. So I recently did this. I had an online course. When I had first launched it, I know it was $90, which is a bit of a steal for this course. I bumped it up to $120. And then I was listening to this podcast. It's Claire Pell's on the Get Paid podcast, and she talks a lot about money.
Mm-hmm.
I'll definitely link to that in the show notes. And this episode was like, I raised my rates from this to this. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to move that course up to be $349, just overnight, not tell anyone, like you said, kind of like an experiment.
Mm-hmm.
And it is selling basically at the same rate. So, and I know that some listeners might be feeling uncomfortable all of a sudden. Well, if I double my rates, what's everyone going to say? But as you said, like, give it a try, especially for the $45 teachers. You're right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's always people in our orbit that are willing, that we don't even know are there. And it's super interesting. I actually had this experience recently where I'm on the list of this woman, and she has tons of different products and courses and stuff that she does, ranging all the way from, I think, $79 up to thousands. And I've never done any of her programs, but I do listen to her, and she puts out great, valuable content. And then this email came through a couple of months ago that was like for a like mastermind situation. And I clicked on it, and it was high end. I think it was, and I ended up getting on a call with her actually. And there was sort of two tiers, and one was 10,000 and one was 20,000. And I said, well, what I know about myself is that I work really well one-on-one. Like when I have someone holding my hand and kicking my ass, more so than I do in a group. And like, what would it be for one-on-one? And she's like, it's $50,000. And I was like, okay, I'm actually considering doing that. And I have been on her list for years. And in doing that, it actually was really insightful to me, because I was like, there's people on my list and on your list, and for yoga teachers listening in your orbit, that are just waiting for the right, like the thing that speaks to them.
Right.
So I really feel like just the experimentation, and that comes back to just this inquiry of yoga, the first Yoga Sutra, Atha Yoga Nushasanam, and now the inquiry and the investigation. And just for the sake of it, do something different and then see what happens, and talk about it and share it. Because when we are in conversation about it, that's when the energy really activates and magnifies and amplifies.
This is fascinating. I want to ask you a couple of questions about this. One is the side of things. I want to circle back to an example using myself and see what you think, and we can talk about money right here on the podcast. But first of all, what I hear so often when this money conversation starts to ramp up is that yoga teachers feel bad that we're making yoga not accessible to those who can't afford it.
Okay.
So what do you say then to that? I know what I say, but I want to hear what you say.
So
Let's
I
say,
personally, yeah,
sorry.
Go
I was
ahead.
just going to say, like to root it in, if we were saying, like I said, a high end one-on-one session is $200+ here in Canada. So some people might say, well, that's not for everyone. Not everyone can afford it. So then yoga is only for the people who can pay that much an hour.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I personally, and I think that I'm curious to hear what your thoughts and insights are on this. I personally have always, so I have, my rates and what I charge. And then I also have this component of my business that is sliding scale, where I am accessible to people. And it's not just this hard line in the sand of like, it has to be this. And that is all, I've always done that in everything. I used to do massage therapy and I do other modalities of healing. And that's always been the way that I have approached my business and my life. And it has always just worked out that there is, people that I'm able to support coming into my programs that could really benefit from it, but can't necessarily afford it. Although I will say it's super annoying to get thousands of emails from yoga teachers saying, with that as the number one excuse, I can't afford it. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Because that's also story. And it's a boring conversation. So like, what are you going to do to change that? But there are times where it's like, no, someone can actually really benefit and get a ton of value from this, and they need it right now, and they don't have the means to do it, and I want to support that. And how do I make that decision? It's really, I close my eyes and go inside, and it's a clear yes. From that internal space. But then there's also the other, it's not just like this black and white thing. It's the other side as well of like, well, and I have a mortgage and I have a child and she goes to school and I travel and my family's in Australia and airline tickets are expensive. And I work hard and I like nice shoes. So I also enjoy having like $12 green juices in California. So there's the both sides of that. And I think it's very easy for people to kind of get on a rant about something. And then if that's your view and that's the way that you see things and that's the way you're experiencing life and that's working for you, great.
Right.
But I think the answer to that might be it's not that lovely.
It's not working.
Yeah.
And that's part of the answer with me. Is a lot of the time I will see yoga teachers not charging enough, not being solid enough in their marketing and their selling of their yoga, and charging what they need to, and then eventually they're switching gears and they're finding other jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they're working for someone else. Maybe they're switching to something else completely.
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of throw their hands up, and exactly what you said at the beginning, there's no money in yoga.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the other piece of that is exactly what you said. Sometimes you end up giving your services or giving your time or helping someone out. And I think when we make enough money, we can give, maybe it's something like, maybe it's giving that service to someone who needs it, or maybe there's some other way that we make a difference in the world and give to the world. So yeah.
And on that, there's like these components that I feel like are really valuable in terms of your relationship with money. And this is something that I've got to download for this, for your peeps. It's day 3 of the accelerator, where it's really looking at, okay, what's my attitude around money? Do I have a clear intention right now with money? How is my mind and my body and my spirit right now? Like, am I tending to those? What are my goals? How am I investing in myself? How am I being generous? And what are my commitments and actions? And the being generous piece. And I think that I really got generosity from my mom, like that gene of generosity. And I have always, I love the felt sense of being generous. I love being able to kind of do like surprise and delights for people, or and I think that having a generosity with money, again, it really just amplifies this energy around money. If you're coming from a place of lack, And that is the vibration that's going out there. And I don't mean to sound so woo-woo, but it's like, you know, if you're in a season where things are really tight financially, then that's when it's like, okay, I got to connect to faith and trust that this is a season. I have the know-how, I have the skills, I have the expertise. If I tend to my mind, my body, my spirit, if I get clear with my intention, if I connect to my faith around my ability to actually manifest in this physical world, I'm doing good work in the world, I'm being of service, I'm doing something productive that is helping humanity. You know, get connected to all the reasons why you do yoga, and shift into that like generous spirit. And it doesn't have to mean that you're giving, you know, money away. It could be, I was just thinking of you, I was at the coffee shop and I know you love this latte. Like I just grabbed you a latte. Like that is being generous of spirit. And again, it really activates and amplifies. And I think that is really, when people start going down the rabbit hole of like, I can't make money and this, and I'm running all over town, it's like, it just is this slippery slope of like kind of negativity and lack, and it will suck you right down into a corporate job.
Right. That was really
that
good.
You
well
can't
said.
stand.
Right.
And the cycle begins again, you know, because then it'll be, you'll do that for a while and you have the security of the money and you have this and that. And then it's like, I'm slowly dying inside. I was put on the planet to do something good. And then it's like, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So you had talked about this practice of checking in and
Mm-hmm.
seeing the abundance coming in, and I can see how that will shift the mindset. Are there any other practices that you think help? Because it's one thing to say, well, just think positive about money. It's very hard for someone who's like, I'm in credit card debt, you know, I need to pay my bills, I need to pay my mortgage, and now
Mm-hmm.
someone's not wanting to pay what I had set for this yoga workshop or something.
Yeah, so there's lots of different resources and influences. Like if you're in debt, I really recommend Dave Ramsey's work, and he has what he calls the debt snowball. And it's a really simple practice that he takes you through, where it's like, first of all, you're just going to look at your debt and sit with that. Like get the numbers down on paper, look at what the amounts are, what are the minimum payments. And then the way that the debt snowball works is you prioritize the lowest balance first, and you pay that off, and then whatever you are paying towards that, you then pay in addition to the second amount. So you end up, until all of your debt's gone, you end up, it really does, I think, get momentum, and it just works. Like I love his approach to that. If you have debt, that's not what all the experts agree with, but that's definitely something that in periods of my life, like when I did a renovation on my house, and that was sort of the biggest kind of debt that I had, I would say, over the history of my financial life. Aside from having a mortgage, was like I had done a really significant renovation. And, you know, my mom had really taught me like cash is king and not to have credit card debt and that type of thing. And I've always been really mindful when I buy cars. I don't do leases. Like I'll save up money to buy a car so that I don't have a car payment and that type of thing. So I had this pretty considerable debt. And because I haven't experienced tons of debt, because of the way in which I've kind of structured my life financially, it's really uncomfortable for me to have debt. Like it's really, really uncomfortable. And so that, like, getting strategies to get out of debt is doing research. But Dave Ramsey is someone that I love. There's another, I can't remember the name of the author, but this is another strategy that I've put in place a couple of years ago that I really love as well, which is called Profit First. So it's basically like breaking down percentage-wise into different buckets. When you earn money, any money, so let's say it's $100 for a private, There's a percentage of it that's immediately being put away towards taxes, depending what tax bracket you're in. Then there's a percentage of it that's being put away towards retirement. And then there's a percentage of it that's put away to business operation expenses. And then a percentage towards like your living expenses. And then a percentage towards fund money. And so whenever anything comes in, it just automatically gets split up into those different buckets. And this is really how and his whole principle is like pay yourself first.
Mm-hmm.
And this is how you build wealth of like, at the end of every month, I have a little chart that I plug in. Okay, this is where all my accounts are at. And I can see month over month. This is what's here and this is what's there. And then at the end of every year, it's really looking at, okay, like this was a great year financially and like I'm wealth building, or this was not a great year financially. And look, I still actually built wealth from just putting that principle into place.
And that's the profit first. And for our listeners, that's Mike Michalowicz. He has a great book on it. I have the audio book on it. And so you're doing the profit first method now then, is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What I love is that you mentioned Dave Ramsey, and you've mentioned over and over again about it's like you keep coming back to the conversation. And it sounds like the conversation can also sometimes be with other people outside of our circles, like listening to someone like Dave Ramsey talk about money, listening to this podcast right now, talking about money. It's got me inspired. And it also brings up a certain amount of little inside fear. Like, am I going to make people uncomfortable talking about money? Oh, I feel like, I forget what it was that you said. Maybe it was finding a money buddy. And then, what does that look like? I'm pretty open talking about money, but I know from having different friends and different family members that some people are like, you don't tell people what you make. You don't tell people how much you paid for your house. Like, do you want to talk to that a little bit? The fear?
Yeah. And just on that being in the conversation, it just actually made me think of another one of my favorite authors, David Bach. He wrote Smart Women Finish Rich, and he just came out with a new book called The Latte Factor. And it really is about this principle of like, and I have done this since I think I was in my late teens. I had read one of Susie Orman's books and learned about dollar cost averaging and how if you just put away a little bit of money over a long period of time, that's actually how you accumulate wealth. And that's what the Latte Factor is about. And it's a super easy read, but he has a Facebook group. So if you feel uncomfortable talking to someone in your inner circle, you could go onto one of any of these authors' Facebook groups and be in a conversation around money there, where it's like, it's just continue to be in the conversation. And it's amazing. I'm on his group, and I love reading the posts that people share and just seeing these wins that people are having and these breakthroughs and ahas and insights. And, with anything, whether it's like your relationship to money or eating really cleanly and not drinking coffee or, getting on your yoga mat, we all fall off the wagon.
Right.
And know that that's going to happen. And when it does, be like, oh, I've done that thing again where I haven't looked at my bank account in 2 months. Okay, I'm going to press the reset button and begin again and re-engage this process and re-engage the relationship. Because I think that that's also something that people will be like, oh, well, it didn't work. I tried it for 3 weeks and then they don't do it again. It's like, no, that's what's going to happen.
Right.
Because that's life. So now that I've said all of that, I totally forgot what you asked me.
No, but I really like that point of we're going to fall away from it. I was talking about the fear of talking to people, and I think you addressed it. If you can't find people or you don't feel comfortable, start listening to conversations. I started listening to a money podcast while I was doing my yoga practice, which felt I felt a little like wrong because I don't usually listen to something that distracts me and pulls me out of, but I was doing it because I was trying to work in some more, like, not that my relationship to money is separate from my spiritual being. Does that make sense?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. And I think that that is like a total myth that people like, you can't be spiritual and have money. It's like, that to me just sounds completely ridiculous.
Right.
They're not interdependent. Like it's all the same. Like it's all, money can be a spiritual practice.
Maybe what we need are spiritual figures that we look up to in the world to be having conversations about money, or we need to be listening to those conversations because sometimes that isn't happening.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, looking at the like I really love David Buck. I mean, I think when I have listened to him on podcasts and I've read quite a lot of his books, I'm like, I genuinely like vibe with this guy. Like I obviously don't know what happens behind the scenes, but I'm like, no, he seems like he's an integrous person and he's doing good things in the world and his motivation is from a genuine place. Like it's not. And I think that that's also, you know, something that's important is for individuals to really check themselves of like, why are we doing the things that we're doing? Like, where is it motivated from? Because if it's primarily motivated from making money, that's got a certain vibe to it. And it can feel very yucky to someone on the other side. But if you're coming from a place that's genuinely motivated to be of service or add value or whatnot, and then the money is the secondary piece, like that feels very different. And that's something that I think is really an individual like question and reflection to hold yourself accountable to, because it does feel different.
Yeah, you're right. You're right in that someone could deliver the same product, but the way they deliver it, the big reason why, if it's like, well, I want to buy a really fancy pair of shoes and so I need your money, or I really want to help you and dig in and do
Exactly.
this. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Like I
it
have the
feels
tool.
different doing it, and it feels different being on the receiving end of it.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think that that's also sort of something to sit with, and for people listening is they can right now look at everything that they're doing and look at the ways in which they're spending their time working and earning money and really sitting with like, why am I doing that?
Yeah. I
And
hope our listeners do some of this, that they have this conversation with their own money in whatever way that is. Take a look at it. Remember that we fall away from it, just like we do our yoga practice or some other, practice that we work towards.
Mhm.
And can you fill us in on, you had said at the beginning when we started talking that you really think it's a myth that yoga teachers can make money. Can you talk about your own experience with that? Like
Sure.
rooted in your own example of, because oftentimes I will say to yoga teachers, how much income do you want to make this year? And there's this long pause.
And I say, I don't know. Yeah, I know.
Like, what do you think
Well,
a
ask
yoga
me
teacher
the
can earn?
same. Whatever they want.
Right.
But that's really the first question, is getting clear on that. Like how much do you want to earn? And then you go into, okay, what could I do to do that? And then how am I going to actually how am I going to do that? And really breaking it down. I think that, and this is a sweeping generalization, but the majority of yoga teachers are like really creatives, and they're not naturally wired to look at the big picture and then like kind of the end goal. It's like, I'm just being here now, loving and giving, and that's amazing. And it also sort of feeds into that I think, frustration that yoga teachers have of like, I'm doing this and I love it and I like can't pay my rent.
Thank you for sharing all of that.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time today as well. If people want to visit your website, do you want to give us the website address?
Yeah, sure. The website is my Katie Brauer website. So that's katiebrauer.com. And then the free download is katiebrauer.com/accelerator.
Okay.
I guess to finish up, I would say, for yoga teachers, like, what's the one thing that you could do today to like enhance your life? What's the one thing you could do today to enhance your business? And that's enough. Just one thing.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be the like crazy to-do list.
I would love it if our listeners either post that on the show notes page. We'll have that in the show notes for you, or it'll be at the top and the end of this episode, but also in our Facebook group as well. We have a great Facebook group, and it'd be fun to see, okay, what's that one thing? And I love how you say just one thing, because sometimes we think, well, I need to do 50 things and then I'll be successful. Nope.
Just the one thing.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this, Katie. It's been a blast and you've inspired me. I definitely want to figure out, like, how can I talk with my money? How can I talk about my money more? How can I just do it and dive in and raise my rate?
Jump on and grab the accelerator thing, because there's so much good juice in there. I mean, it's 3 videos and 3 downloadable action books, but it will take you on a journey for sure, and really set in motion some shift and empowering your relationship around finances.
Okay. I'll ask our listeners. I'll see if I can try and do this before I do the outro and let you know my key takeaways of that.
Cool. Love it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Hey, Connected Yoga teachers. Katie and I were chatting after the interview, and she started to share a couple of things. So I asked her if I could hit record again and capture this for you. Listen to what she did when she needed to find a place to teach yoga. I've never heard of this location before talking with her, and we have a full article with every location imaginable on our resources. I'll make sure to link to it in our show notes, but this place was not on that list. So listen to this.
Yeah, so one of the things is really looking for what's not obvious. And when I look back on my career, there have been so many things that I've brought to life that were not the obvious path. So for instance, when I was living in Colorado, I had a desire to open a studio, and in Vail, Colorado, rent is completely insane. And I had a friend of mine that wanted to do this with me, and we were looking at different spaces, and I was just like, my internal radar was just like a big no, like this is a really bad idea. And I ended up actually going to one of the local athletic clubs, and I was in there and I realized they have 8 squash courts, half of which are not being utilized. And I ended up putting together a proposal to turn one of the squash courts into, at the time I also taught Pilates, into a studio. And what ended up happening was I got my space. They ran all the bookings. I essentially managed it and hired the people and managed the schedule and that type of thing. And I made a percentage. And then I also made a percentage on the gap between, so I think it was 70% that I made. And then I could bring teachers on and I would pay them anywhere from 45% to 70% of what we would do. So I was making a passive income as well. That was in my early 20s. I look back on that now at 40 and I'm like, whoa, that was really smart to do that. And my schedule was like, I would work 6 a.m. in the morning to 10 a.m. 5 days a week. So I was working 20 hours a week. And the rest of the time I was just playing.
Oh, I love that you found this whole other space that existed where you just saw the opportunity in your early 20s of that squash court. Because sometimes I think that it has to be like, we have to own it and then create the space and make the space. And like you said, it's a lot different to run a yoga studio.
Yeah. And when I came here to Cali, which was now 10 years ago, like I went and of course, all the studios here were very established at the time. And there was like, I couldn't just get on the schedule. I went and started teaching classes out of the Del Mar Library. And I got to use the space for free. The demographic was over 75. It was so amazing to see these men and women that like literally had not put their head below their hips in like 30 years. But I got a ton of privates out of that, and I made a lot of relationships, and it was like, yeah. So there's another example of like, it's not obvious, but I just wanted to teach and kind of have some sort of like schedule happening. And then that one thing led to another, that led to another. And at one of my favorite studios here it was the first place that I took a class. I was like, I'm teaching here. And the woman was like, yeah, no, there's a waiting list of teachers wanting to teach here. And so I put together a proposal for her of a class time that was non-existent. It was 2 classes a week that I proposed. And I would pay her to teach at the studio, right, and establish myself. And that is what I did. And it ended up switching into classes that were packed. And the way in which the pay was organized at that studio was really, really lucrative. And that's another example of like, okay, I was told no, that it was full. And then I was like, wait, but no, I really want to be here. And how could I make her say yes?
Right.
Let me put together my irresistible offer.
Right. Thank you for sharing all of that.
Yeah. You're so welcome.
Well, connected yoga teachers, I want to hear from you. What was the biggest key takeaway? If you want to share that in our Facebook group, you can, or maybe you want to share it on Instagram and tag me. I would love to hear what you learned today. One of my key takeaways is to find different ways in my life where I can have a money buddy, as Katie talked about. So I actually reached out to a group of friends and said, I'd like to talk every couple of weeks, and I'd like to really focus in and talk about money. So I would love to hear from you, connected yoga teachers. What were your key takeaways, and what are you planning on doing in your yoga business? There is a way to actually leave me a voicemail. If you look on the connectedyogateacher.com on the homepage, there's a button over on the right-hand side where you can actually leave me a voicemail, and I reply to each and every one of those. Before I sign off today, I want to say a huge shout out to Rena Wren, who has just finished up with the first weekend of the Mama Nurture Conway, Arkansas training. I'm so excited that Rena is sharing Mama Nurture, our prenatal yoga school training there. And if you are feeling like you missed out, not to worry, Rena is actually flying to Canada. She'll be teaching over 2 long weekends. So we've adjusted the Mama Nurture Ontario schedule for Rena so that she can come here. So it'll be May 15th to the 18th, 2020, and June 12th to the 15th, 2020. So if you're interested in that at all, go to mamanurture.ca. That's MAMA for mama, mamanurture.ca. Thank you to our team that made today's episode possible. And also thank you, dear connected yoga teacher. It is because of you tuning in, listening to the podcast, giving us feedback, asking us questions, reaching out, sharing, talking about the podcast. It's all of that that really makes this possible. So I would like to know, connected yoga teachers, what will you be doing this week to stay connected to yourself, your yoga practice, and to your community, so that you can share the yoga that lights you up?